More fallout after the release of the Inspector General's FISA report. Attorney General William Barr blasting the IG's conclusions. Barr calling out the FBI and also going after the media.
I felt this was very flimsy. These omissions were not satisfactorily explained. And I think that leaves open the possibility to infer bad faith. I think our nation was turned on its head for 3 years. I think based on a completely bogus narrative that was largely fanned and hyped by an irresponsible press. And I think that there were gross abuses of FISA and inexplicable behavior that is intolerable in the FBI.
The Attorney General also doubling down on his assertion that the Trump campaign was spied on.
Well, it's clearly spied upon. I mean, that's what electronic surveillance is. I think wiring people up to go in and talk to people and make recordings of their conversations is spying.
Jesse, you have been deep in the state of mind on this report. You read. I watched you. You read the whole executive summary yesterday. You were underlining things. I'm not exactly sure what specifically to ask you about, but maybe we just talk about Bill Barr as the Attorney General, saying basically He's saying that the Inspector General did not hit the mark.
What he's saying is that when you open up an investigation into an opposing political campaign, and if you're the FBI, and you open it up based on foreign rumors, that is a very thin predicate to base that on. And not only do you just open up an investigation onto one 28-year-old who has a drunken conversation at a bar, you all of a sudden open on Flynn, open on Manafort, and open on Page. That is dramatic to do at that point. All he's saying is, why didn't the FBI give a defensive briefing to the Trump campaign? People say, oh, well, you don't want to tip the Trump campaign off. Well, you went to the Russians. Yeah. You alerted the Russians that summer, hey, stop messing around, we know what you're doing, but you don't go to the Trump campaign. You don't think they could have gone to Jeff Sessions and say, hey, there's going to be some infiltration opportunity, better watch out, there could be some issues, let me show you how to deal with it? No, they investigated the Trump campaign and not the Russians. Okay, second point. The spying occurred, there was wiretapping, and there was undercover agents that went in and secretly recorded Trump campaign officials. The dossier, according to the Inspector General, was the central and essential document used to wiretap the campaign. The FBI lawyer said this was essentially a single source FISA, and they drew almost entirely from the Steele dossier. That means Hillary bought a warrant. That means Hillary paid for foreign interference in an election. And they knew almost immediately the dossier was bogus, because when they interviewed the source of Steele's ridiculous report, he said, yeah, it's all nothing. It's all hearsay. It's all junk. Steele doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And they continued for a year to lie about Steele and to deceive the court and to forge documents to make it look like Page was a bad guy when, in fact, he was a good guy.
Well, it was
and that was the most egregious thing, because you can look at the end of this. Mueller, what does he do? For 2 years, he knows there's no collusion. They knew for years there was no collusion, yet they put the country through hell to build an obstruction case. This was not an unbiased investigation. I don't care what they say. They had no evidence of bias. That's just because they didn't even admit it. Of course they're not dumb enough to admit it.
Let me ask Juan about this. So one of the things that in the report the IG said is that the warrants were justified, that there was evidence for it, and that they couldn't say what the other evidence is, and that apparently is because it must come from another source, like the CIA, perhaps?
Correct. And I think the IG report, Dana, speaks for itself. And this is not, you know, Bill Barr's great at spin, apparently. I think better at spin than at being Attorney General. And what he did with the Mueller report was he was able to preempt it and to try to define it before it was out in public. With this case, you know, you couldn't do it, Bill Barr, because guess what? Bill Barr, you have Robert Mueller working for you. You've got John Durham, whose report you're now going to control, working for you. But you don't have Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, working for you. He's independent. So his analysis comes out, and as I said, the report is very clear. There was no political bias, none,
no
zero.
Documented.
And I think
no political bias,
zero.
Okay,
but
so then why'd they lie and deceive the court?
they didn't deceive the court.
Yes, they did, Juan. They withheld information.
They did not.
And then they forged documents.
They did not. There was
Yes,
additional information, and there was one person who made, and this is, now famous, 17 clerical errors or whatever.
Wasn't a
Fine.
clerical
That
error.
one person
They
let 'em
lied.
go. But
if
you
it
know
was
what's
clerical,
key?
he wouldn't be referred to as
What's
criminal.
key here is it doesn't even matter what's in the report, even though we can all read it, because the right wing will continue with conspiracy theories that can't be proven.
All right, wait.
It's
You
the
guys
never-ending
said
story.
that the FISA
never-ending
thing was
story.
clean, and you were wrong.
No, it
you
wasn't.
guys
Hey,
said the
what about the
dossier
court?
had nothing to do
Look,
with the FISA
you know
court,
what?
and you were wrong. You were wrong the whole time.
No, it was not. In fact, it's unbelievable that you would say anybody except, you know what you should say?
What?
I apologize because this report is out.
I
You were waiting.
apologize.
You should apologize.
I think Hillary should apologize, and Jim
Can I
Comey
ask,
should.
know what?
let me
No
ask
facts
Greg
apparently
something.
matter.
Read the report, Juan.
Let me ask
Yeah,
Greg something.
you should read
so
the report.
FBI, now they've got this report. They're going to do an audit. They might have some changes, but there are like no consequences. And also, you haven't heard anybody, like the media doesn't really say that the Obama administration, like somebody had to have been checking this stuff off.
And when they knew that the dossier was a fraud, they didn't want to tell anybody because they realized that's the gooey hot center to all of this. It really bothers me because it puts barroom stories. Like, I have a million barroom stories. This entire, what Jesse said is true. This was based on barroom gossip that even Steele couldn't verify and said he couldn't back up. And yet that was the thing that launched a 3-year witch trial. My God, I have barroom stories that could, if this is that, but when one you say conspiracies, that's the best. That's the conspiracy theory to kill all conspiracy theories. A golden shower tape that never happened, that had to do in Obama's bed, that he stayed in a hotel, and Trump walked in there and decided, hey, let's defile this bed. That's a conspiracy theory.
And then I clicked my pen twice.
And then I clicked my pen twice.
Exactly.
The thing is also about the 17 mistakes. They are all mistakes, but they're all mistakes in one direction.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's in the same direction, benefiting one perspective, I think you call that.
Yeah, maybe that's why the
Emily, can I
FBI
ask
agents
you
were
about
cheering
this?
on
Well,
Trump
Emily, let me
after
ask
the
you
election.
about this. So the FBI is going to surveil Page, but Page is also, and it says in the report, a source for the CIA. So how does that work?
Well, that's why we're missing a lot of evidence that Durham has referenced. And I think the important part here is to respond to your point. The attorneys for the OIG, they take as testimony true. They take as testimony fact, meaning if someone says, nope, I am not biased, then they will put that down and say, okay, then there was no bias. And I think the most important part, the crucial element to this, is the fact that the Attorney General has come out and said that there are gross and clear abuse of the surveillance process. And what we see here in these mistakes, which I refuse to call them that, they are clear omissions. As you said, it was always to one side. This includes these consensually monitored statements from both Page and Manafort that was exculpatory. If one of us was being prosecuted and you learned that prosecution withheld consistently exculpatory evidence, and then the Attorney General comes out and says, during the investigation, it was consistently everything we uncovered was to one side. Where do we stop? Where does the investigation stop? Why then did they keep going until they found a modicum, a tiny bit of evidence that went to the truth that they had already concluded? The answer is this impeachment.